Good morning. We've got a lovely bit of sunshine today. I'd like to read you one of my favourite stories. Oh, this is so beautiful. It's called Spider, My Darling Love. It's true. Spider. It had been my 16th birthday in May 1949, and now the gossip was flying around my New Forest village as I wouldn't work in the mill like everybody else. You'll spend your life on that singles pew if you don't drop that stupid nickname, Margaret Webb, my mother would judge. But I liked being called Spider by my friends. It was cool. Anyhow, there were no boys or eligible men in our village. Most of them had bits missing after they'd returned from the war. I was old enough to decide what I wanted to be named, and old enough to know that the unfolded basket of washing that I was carrying would not double crease inside the washing basket either, as Mother always predicted. As usual, Mother was in the house throwing out exaggerated warnings. First it was of rain. Before that it'd been housewife's knee as I'd scrubbed our front door step raw. Then webbed feet because I'd paddled in the steps' water. Don't get me wrong, I loved every inch of her, but a constant worrying would make me recoil like a garden snail. You'll be good at sliding on lettuces, she'd say, when you've finished sulking. Other mothers told me to take her assertiveness with a pinch of salt. After all, she'd been a suffragette. So I bit my lip and counted to 10 while she spat out words village girls shouldn't hold in their memory. Mr. Bishop, he lived next door. He was an elderly gentleman who never joined in with village gossip. He always had a pipe hanging out of his mouth and a newspaper under his arm. Busy man, he'd mutter as he passed. Gotta pick the winners. He meant betting on horses. Mother would pull me close and warn me off talking to older men. But as I left the school uniform behind, old Bishop began tipping his hat at me. When he learned I'd had a birthday, he asked if I was going to work at the mill with my friends. No chance. I'm going to be famous and I'm going to travel the world. Maybe not, he smirked confidently. Especially once you've seen my handsome nephew. He looks like a movie star and he's coming to stay with me in a few weeks' time. Frank Gibson is his name. If he looks like you, I'm not interested. 3 weeks later, Frank Gibson arrived. He marched down our street, swinging a well-used brown leather suitcase. Bubbles of excitement sparked within. He was so handsome, so tall, so available, so kissable under that Clark Gable moustache. I needed to talk to him, to touch him, but how could I? If Mother got a sniff of this, I'd be bound in a chastity belt forever and sent off to the circus instead of the stage. Frank Gibson was a divorced man, and however many times this replayed in my head, the facts never changed. I'd always known that divorced people were ugly, saggy, wrinkled beings wearing saggy trench coats. I couldn't have been more wrong. He was over 6 foot tall and spectacularly gorgeous. Okay, he was a bit older than me, but he had no war wounds like our men. For weeks I watched him. He always left Mr. Bishop's at 6:45 a.m, noisily clanking the gate, and he'd wait for my net curtain to twitch. Then a spring would bounce into his step as he walked up the road. I needed a plan. I'd invite him for tea with my mother and I. Sunrises got earlier, so I didn't look stupid carrying the washing basket at 6:45. When I bumped into him at his front gate, he said, "Good morning, Miss Webb." "Good morning, Mr. Gibson. Are you taking the long way to your washing line?" "I might be." Flicking my hair like Marilyn Monroe, I nervously asked if he'd like to come for a cup of tea with Mother and I after work. "I'd rather take you for a drink in the pub, Margaret." "I've never actually been to a pub, Mr. Gibson." "You'll be fine. I'll take good care of you." "But what will the neighbours say?" "Maybe it'd be best to come and have tea and a giggle with me here instead, Mr. Gibson." "No, Spider. I want to be alone with you. I swear I'll look after you." "Crikey, alone with a man. A man wants me." In the pub, my darkest fears were confirmed. He wasn't a divorced man. He was a married man. His wife had left him and he couldn't live with the shame. In Surrey, she'd kept everything he'd worked for, including their marriage certificate. I felt his pain. I remembered how I asked him, "Do you think people will talk?" as our pinky fingers brushed on the starlit walk home. He laughed as he scooped me off the ground and into his arms. "Let's give them the chance to talk themselves silly." His lips hovered over mine. You guessed it, I never slept that night or the next. I was too dizzy to study. Mother constantly groaned. "Margaret, you're sickening for something. Practice your words, or for God's sake, go and work at the mill. Stop pacing up and down." But how could I? We'd been seen kissing under the railway bridge. It was only a matter of time before Mother found out. A week after our pub rendezvous, I was convinced we were being followed. Frank made a decision not to ruin my reputation and future. He would move to his mother's in Poole for 3 months. He says, "We'll write to each other every day, and after that we'll see how we feel, Spider." The next day he walked up our street with brown leather suitcase rigid by his side. He tipped his hat at Mother and I by the gate. Tears and ink rolled down my face onto paper for 3 of the longest months of my life. 3 months to the day he promised I received my final letter. "Let's run away. I'll be watching the postman give you this letter, and then I'll meet you at the train station." I looked up the road and saw him walking away. I wrote Mother a note, a loving note for all the family to read. "I know you'll be horrified, Mother, at what I have to do, but Mother, I will write often. Then you will know that every day I've asked God to bless you all." I crept down the creaky stair and hid the note in her knitting bag as I watched her roll close through the mangle with her back turned to me. I tiptoed out of our family cottage without looking back. I ran towards Sway railway station. Frank was there, stood on platform 1 with his arms outstretched. At 11:20 the train to Bournemouth rolled in. He took hold of my left hand and slid a gold ring on my 3rd finger. At Bournemouth, a bus took us to Torquay, where 3 years later our eyes still matched the stars. After returning from work and leaving his boots outside one day, I jumped into his arms like I'd done at the railway station that day. "What about my kiss?" he joked. "I've got something better than a kiss, Frank. We're going to have a baby." "My darling love, this is fantastic. Let's get married." "But Frank, you're already married." 2 weeks later, Frank asked 2 strangers to support us as we walked hand in hand into the registry office. April Rose was born healthy and screaming, followed 2 years later by Mark Anthony. Our life together was a whir of abundant love. After 5 years in Torquay, one night Frank came home early from work. He took off his coat and hat outside the flat before he entered. He looked like a Cheshire cat. What, Frank? Tell me, I squealed, expecting he'd been promoted or won a bet on the horses. "Sit down, Spider," he said. "Come here, kids. We're moving back to Sway." I was aghast. "I know you've always missed your family so terribly, Margaret." I jumped into his arms and we all began twirling, dancing around the room. Where to? "I've got us a caravan on a permanent site. It'll be like being on holiday, Spider. A great big adventure forever. Oh, Frank, it's the most wonderful thing." A few weeks later, we were back with the forest nature. My mother, brother and sister, they were all married. Family life couldn't have been more perfect. Eventually, April married and Mark Anthony graduated. Home alone, our days revolved around grandchildren and learning how to text. But bad news came. Frank started to shrivel before my eyes. The doctor sent him for tests and the results couldn't have been worse. Cancer had come to feast on our love. He was diagnosed terminal. Let's go back to Torquay, Spider, to the bed and breakfast from all those years ago. In shock, I packed the same leather-worn brown suitcase. Then the following year, I bought a lightweight case with wheels. Frank quietly died 2 weeks before our third visit. Today, I'm 83 years old, and no one knows me as Spider. Every morning, before my feet touch the floor, I kiss my gold wedding ring, the one he slid onto my finger at the railway station, and I thank God for our blessed lives. At night time, as the sun sets, I look up to the sky, to my Frank, and I sense his lips searching mine, as they did under the railway bridge.